Assalamu alaikum. And welcome to episode 2 of Behlool Ramadan Radio 2017. Today, unfortunately, is our last show of the Ramadan month, and the topic we have chosen tonight is religion and culture. With me here today, I'm Mazahir Kareem, and with me I have
Ali Jawad Kareem.
Tawseef Bajani.
And of course, our beloved guest, Sheikh Jafar Ladak, who we had an excellent show with last week on Taqleed. And if you didn't get a chance to hear that last week, make sure you get onto our YouTube channel on the MKSI Leicester YouTube and check that out as well. Right, so the topic we've chosen tonight is religion versus culture, and there's quite a lot of topics we want to get through. But before we start, just to let you know, please get involved with the show and make sure you text us with your questions or call us with your questions as well. We do have 2 competitions tonight for kids and one for adults as well. And the prize that we have for kids is a very special fidget spinner, which has been blessed by all of us in the Behlool radio office. And for adults, there's a big box of chocolates, so we will be asking you some questions. They're not too easy, but get involved and you might have a chance to win that as well. Right, so first of all, we're speaking to Sheikh Jafar, and we are going to first know the definition of culture and the definition of religion. So if you could please give us an insight about definition of culture first of all, and then we can move forward.
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
First and foremost, thank you very much again for inviting me for the show on the radio. I hope last week was beneficial, and inshallah, hopefully this week's discussion will be beneficial as well. So, our discussion on religion and culture is one that's quite a sensitive one. And I think that we have to take that into account, because we know that everybody has their appreciation of religion and culture and the way in which those 2 things interact with each other. So when we try to start by just defining what we mean by religion and culture, we would probably state that religion should be the divinely revealed way of life, as revealed, indicated to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either through Quranic revelation, through prophethood, through other types of revelation, and through other prophets. Culture, however, is the manifestation of human or human achievements, and as a collective, be it as small as a community center or as wide as a global, we can have various forms of culture. And because a collective come together through their inherited experiences, they themselves portray and express themselves through those practices. And that is what culture is. And so, for example, in our community, through their own inherited practices, they have a cultural expression which has suited them, which has benefited them over time. Globally, we have cultural expressions, or continentally, we have expressions as well. And so one of the challenges that we have today is understanding the boundaries and how culture and religion may work hand in hand with each other. At what point does culture need to be separate from religion? At what point can religion be seen through the eyes of culture? And how do we get the best out of both? These are the types of discussions that we want to have, inshallah, tonight.
Inshallah. And I mean, when we're speaking about culture and religion, should they be separate or should they be mixed together in order for people to be more comfortable in their surroundings?
Well, because human beings inherently express themselves by virtue of their ideas, their customs, their behaviors, and what through their own human experience has worked or not worked, it is impossible to separate culture from religion. Every single religion is going to be expressed through a certain lens. Even those people who say that we are purely religion only, even they have some sort of cultural expression. And that culture will probably be their historic understanding of what religion was. Even religion of Islam came at a certain time and at a certain culture. So even through revelation, it could not be ignorant of culture. Imagine a thought exercise for you and I right now. Imagine Islam had never been revealed. There's no such thing as Islam. There's no Quran yet. And today, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam stands up and says, I am Rasulullah. I am the last messenger of God. Here is the Quran, and so on and so forth. It would be impossible to think that the Prophet would not understand the culture that he came in, and that he did not reflect some of the issues in accordance with the culture that he's living in. So imagine now for a moment, Rasulullah stands up and announces his prophethood in Brazil. He would have to appreciate the culture, the language, the clothes, the types of things that people do for fun, and so on and so forth. Imagine Islam was revealed in India today. Again, it must also understand the culture if it's revealed in France, and so on and so forth. So when we say, do these things, are these things separate? They cannot be separate. The inherently culture and religion at some point do meet. It's asking the question of the boundaries and the way to get the best out of religion and the best out of culture.
So did Prophet, peace be upon him, himself practice cultures himself, or did he try to stay away from that and just...
The Prophet, peace be upon him, had to institute religion and show what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed. But at the same time, he did understand that there were cultural identities. And slowly, he had to try to show where those cultural identities, if they were, those customs, if they were negative, he would have to demonstrate why they were negative and the negative impact that they had. And he tried to do this through rationality. Let me give you one or two very simple examples from our ahadith. So, for example, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wanted to talk about humanity. Now in that period, people were divided into their tribal system, and they were divided by color, and they were divided by creed. And Islam wants to bring humanity at the forefront of the picture, and doesn't want other expressions to hinder the way in which people would see each other. Now, if I see you first and foremost through your nationality or through your tribe or through your surname, then I have already limited you, and I've dehumanized you, and I've limited you into something very, very small. If I see you as human first and foremost, then I see you as equal, and later on I can understand you through your culture, through your surname, through your nationality. So at the time of the Prophet, you had things like the tribal system, and the Prophet wanted to tell them, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Before anything else, God doesn't see you through your tribes, God doesn't see you through your surnames, God sees you through your taqwa, your adala, your God consciousness, and the one who is most God conscious is the one who is most honorable in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet had to deal with this. And at times, culture in Arabia became so emphatic that it completely covered the way in which Muslims would think. And this was well after the Prophet as well. For example, in Nahj al-Balagha, there's a really interesting hadith. And Imam Ali alayhi salam is leading his army out into the Battle of Nahrawan. And as he's got his army behind him, he's collected tribes and he's put them together and they're coming out to fight. He's leading the army, he's at the front on his horse and he's riding towards the battlefield. Nahj al-Balagha mentions the hadith. It says that 2 or 3 people started to run in front of Imam Ali alayhi salam. So Imam Ali is on his horse, behind him is the army, and in front of him are certain people. You know what they would do? They would physically run in front of Imam Ali alayhi salam and zigzag, weave like this in front of the Imam. The Imam turns to one of his commanders and says, "What's these guys doing? Why are they, weaving, bobbing in and out in front of me?" And he heard the response as follows. He said, "This is our tribal culture. In order to show our commander how ready we are to fight on his behalf, how eager we are, how much strength and energy we have on his behalf, there's always a few people that run in front of him, zigzagging in and out, to get to the battlefield ahead of him." What do you think Imam Ali alayhi salam said? He said, "This is nonsense, this is stupid." He said, if they're going to do that, they're going to get tired before they get to the battlefield. What kind of culture is this? So you can see that these people, even though they had the Prophet with them, even though they had Imam Ali with them, even though they had Imam Hassan with them, Imam Husayn, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, they couldn't help but bring out what they were doing because they hadn't thought about it. They hadn't weighed up their practices. They hadn't thought about their own activity and whether that's actually beneficial or whether it's actually not beneficial. And as a response, they just did it, even in front of the Imams. And the Imam had to tell them, this is nonsense. If you run for 3 hours to the battlefield, how are you going to be on the battlefield? Now that shows you that at the time of the Imams and the Prophets, there were these cultural influences. It shows you how far these cultural influences went and how the Imams had to deal with the realities of these situations. So you cannot separate these things. What you can do is educate people to think about the role of their customs, the role of their behaviors, and whether these things are actually in accordance with the religion, and whether these things are in accordance with intellect, whether these things are in accordance with growth, or whether they actually negatively impact these things.
So I guess this also goes for the burying of the daughters alive. Was that more of a cultural thing in Arabia?
It was a complete culture, and the culture was born out of a number of issues. The first one was a hatred for women, hatred for girls or females, and the idea was that men are inherently more valuable than women, number one. Number two, the second issue was that women were treated so badly that fathers, husbands didn't want to bring up daughters knowing that their own flesh and blood would be treated so badly. They would be sold off into slavery, they'd be forced into prostitution, they would be slaves, they wouldn't be respected, they were just there as commodities. So as a father, people didn't want their own daughters to be that. Second. Third was that women primarily didn't earn. They were considered a burden. Men, boys, worked, traded, farmers, cultivators, warriors, thieves, but women didn't. So they didn't earn anything, so which means they costed in that sense. So again, a father didn't want to bring up a child when they're already in a state of poverty. The Quran mentions this. It says, "La taqtulu awladakum khashyatan imlaq, nahnu narzuquhum wa iyyakum." Do not kill your children out of a fear of poverty. We are sustaining them and we sustain you. So these thought processes, which were at the start point wrong, became a culture over a period of time where it is no longer even thought about. People would just go, you have a daughter, have to go and bury her alive. And there's so many stories in Islamic history about how painful it was for men to have to go out and bury their own daughters. And we have one famous story in the books of Islamic history. It says that a father took his daughter out to play and didn't tell her. And then he made her dig her own grave and then later put her in, started throwing the sand on her. And eventually she's putting her arm out, trying to grab her own father. And the father's crying, and he's crying knowing what he's doing. But he can't stop himself because that's his practice. And it shows you how a culture can be so strong that the mind can tell you something is wrong, something is up, and still we're going to do those things. And that's the problem with culture. Or that's a downside to culture. The positive side of culture is that when any culture or practice or behavior is benefiting the community, benefiting the society, if it's properly instituted and people understand it, then they will massively benefit through that culture. We have so many brilliant cultures in our community. It might be something as simple as feeding people. It might be something like the way in which we do our a'mal. It may be that our brilliant culture is that at the end of salah we stand up and we recite ziyarah. You know, other communities may not have that. Other communities have other positive cultures. So culture is just an expression of the behavior, and depending on what type of expression it is, either it can be negative or it can be positive.
So what were some of the cultures that Rasulullah embraced from the Arabian society at the time?
Lovely question. So if you imagine at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the practices that the community had were a lot of them based to do with Arab bravery, Arab strength, Arab generosity, Arab care for its wider community. And you'll remember at the time of the Prophet, they started something called Hilf al-Fudul. And this was a group of people from each tribe, whereby if anyone had a claim, they felt that they could go to independent arbiters and have their claim looked at, to the extent that the Prophet stated, in Islam, if you called me to a practice like Hilf al-Fudul, I would still practice it, or I would champion it. So the bravery of the community, or the respect that they tended to have for each other, or that they had for warriors, or that they had for in-laws by virtue of intermarriage, all of these cultures were very positive, and the Prophet had the practice of bringing these things up. So for example, in Europe today, the monarchs of Europe all intermarry with each other. It's very difficult to know whose blood is whose. They're all first, second, third cousins of each other. The Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, Swedish, Danish, all the nobility and royalty marries into each other. And of course, one of the purposes of that was so that you didn't go to war, or you created peace with another country, or really it was to exploit and to keep wealth between each other. At the time of the Prophet, these tribes used to marry into each other in order to try to broker peace. This was a positive culture. This wasn't anything religious, but they had a positive practice and behavior that they tried to keep. And even after the Prophet, he did this. That's why, arguably, he married someone like Aisha, because, as we argue, that he did this because he wanted to broaden the amount of communities that he was bringing into Islam. So these were positive cultures that the Prophet had in his own time.
Definitely. I hope that's given everyone something to marinate on for a moment. We're going to go to some question. This is a competition for our listeners, so I hope you guys do get involved. We're going to start with the kids one, first of all, where you have a chance to win a very, very special fidget spinner. And I know all the kids love these because I see them playing with them all day long. What's a fidget spinner? It's one of these things that you must have seen the kids with they hold it and they spin it and it's spinning round and round, and kids, it's the new craze.
You're not that old. You must know it.
No idea.
We'll have to get one for Sheikh as well.
Give me one.
Goes then,
give me one, please.
Add that to the gift list, please.
Well, you'll have to win the competition in order to win.
I'll win it, trust me, don't worry.
So that's it. We are going to be a bit biased to let Sheikh enter as well. First of all, then, for the kids, what do we say? Under 12 or do the over 12 play with fidget spinners?
Under 12's awake. Can we have some response?
Under 12 is anyone awake?
Why aren't you in bed?
Yeah, the first question is, if you're under 12, why are you not in bed? So, okay, I'm going to start with the question. If we don't get a response straight away, the question still stands, and hopefully by the end of the show, someone will enter. And if you're the only entrant, you might just win it anyway, so give it a go. The first question is, how many sons and daughters did the Prophet Muhammad have? We want to know how many sons and how many daughters, and without Googling it as well, please, to make it a little bit more interesting.
How do we know someone Googles it not?
Yeah, don't let your kids go onto the internet for the next half an hour or so.
But how are they going to listen to us then?
That's true as well. I didn't think that one through properly.
I think 10 years ago when we did Behlool Radio, there was no
Google so at that time.
No one had smartphones. It was a lot easier.
Exactly. So yeah, let's not Google it. Keep it interesting. There are a couple more questions to follow up before you win this very special fidget spinner. So and then moving back to our topic at hand tonight. If anyone has any questions so far, I know there's about just over 30 people listening right now. You can send it on YouTube. on the live chat or on the WhatsApp text, or you can phone in as well. We do appreciate callers. So moving on.
Right. Another question that we've got, I mean, from the brains in the studio room. Will Imam Mahdi accept culture when he comes back? Ajala ta'ala farajosh.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we mentioned that culture is not something inherently negative. It is an expression of inherited behaviors, an expression of practices that people see either as positive or that people inherently cling on to for themselves. And because of that human nature of expressing oneself, then we cannot say that there will never be a cultural expression of religion. And the fact that the Prophet himself had brought in external cultures into the practices that Muslims were doing, as we mentioned, such as saying, I would carry on Hilf al-Fudul, or trying to bring intertribal marriages, wherever the culture is beneficial to humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam will support that, and he will want people to express themselves in those ways. Wherever a culture hinders the growth of people, or it is outright against Islam, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam will have to try to express to people, explain and prove to people why this culture is negative for them. Now that goes to the question of how do we measure whether a culture is good for us or bad for us. And of course the first thing is whether it is accepted in Islam in terms of our fiqh, in terms of our theology, in terms of our akhlaq. But the other way to really measure any culture, because everyone argues that their culture is within the boundaries of Islam. No one's going to say, I'm doing a culture that is outside of Islam. You know, be it marriage, or be it, you know, how we express ourselves with azadari, or how we express ourselves in a'mal. No one's going to say this is negative, or this is against Islam. So how do we objectively measure whether a culture is right or wrong? And the real tool to do that is to see whether that culture is actually developing people. We also have to go back to a starting philosophical point. The purpose of religion is to develop the individual and develop the collective, right? So the collective may be the communal collective, the national collective, the global collective, or tomorrow when we finally conquer Mars, it will be the Martian collective, or the galactical collective, yes? So think about this. Any action now, take any culture, any form of expression, form of practice that we do. Is it benefiting me? Is it achieving the aims that it had originally or now? If it's actually bringing about the development of yourself or the development of the community, then this is a culture that we should continue to promote. The moment we see the culture, whatever the cultural expression is of that religion, begin to become a hindrance to people's growth, shackle the intellect, shackle the religion, at that point we have to start asking whether that culture needs to be evolved, shifted, or let go entirely. That's very hard for people to be able to do. But the task as a community, especially for leadership, is to try to identify whether the practices are still achieving what the religion wants. So the religion says, we want you to become a fulfilled, wholesome human being. Is this practice helping you achieve that, or is it hindering you? If it's helping you, let it blossom. If it's hindering you, query it. Query how it can continue to be practiced in its form, continue to ask how the form can be shifted, and whether it actually needs to be retained at all in the first place.
That's very interesting points. I mean, because can range from a varied magnitude of things that we ourselves, if we look at our own communities, practice. For example, is something like the majalis, is it cultural, or is it something that is taught to us by the ai can it be modernized? Because certain youths don't really pay attention during lectures unless they are from certain speakers, or how could we introduce something that
Yeah, even me, when I'm speaking, I tend not to
listen to yourself,
be there either. I'm on
Zone
autopilot.
out.
Yeah, that's it. Let's just all sit in silence for 10 minutes and contemplate. All right? That's a really good question, and I think it's probably one of the most important questions that our community can ask. And I think that there are a few people that are really engaged in this question. For example, I know Dr. Sibtain Panjwani has been working very hard on trying to create a paper and research this question about the role of the pulpit and how the pulpit can continue to evolve. Now, your question is not a religious one at all. It's purely cultural. If you look within the Islamic history, the Prophet ﷺ had a pulpit, and the Prophet would sit on the pulpit and he would deliver lectures. Imam Ali alayhi salam the same. In fact, in Nahj al-Balagha, we have specific traditions where Imam alayhi salam would be delivering a sermon and people would stand up in the middle of the sermon and ask him questions. Now maybe they didn't agree, maybe they were trying to challenge, maybe they didn't understand. But we do have these points where the Imam is being queried, questioned. We also know at times the Prophet would sit in circles and discuss, sometimes with sisters only, sometimes with guys, brothers only. And we have specific traditions on this. There's a tradition, for example, the hadith, and this is quoted in a very interesting book called Fiqh al-Zahra, the fiqh of Sayyidah Zahra alayha salam, in the tafsir of Hadith al-Kisa by Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Husayn Shirazi, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, says that Rasulullah would stand outside the masjid and he would speak to the ladies. And when a man walked past, depending on how sensitive or private the conversation was with that lady, he would allow a man to stay and stand fairly distanced or fairly close, either out of earshot or in earshot. If it was a private discussion with a lady, then of course the man would stand distanced so that he couldn't hear, but he would be able to see so that Rasulullah would prove there's nothing dodgy going on. It's permitted for me as a messenger to speak to a lady, and it's permitted for a lady to speak to me. If it was not a private discussion and the Prophet wanted people to benefit from it, he would allow a man to stand within earshot, meaning still away from the lady but within earshot. Yeah? So now think about the way in which we culturally talk about our education settings versus how the Prophet created his education settings. We have other hadith, and again, think about these things in terms of our lecture setting. Very famous hadith. I think all of you and all of our respected listeners will know this hadith. The Prophet walks into Masjid Nabawi. There are three groups. 1, standing, praying salah. 2, sitting, reciting Quran. 3, they're sitting in a discussion circle, talking about ilm. Which of the three groups does he go to? Which one? Discussion circle. Doesn't go to the praying salah. He doesn't go to those reciting Quran. Rasulullah, isn't he the one that loves salah? Isn't he the one that would stand all night in prayer such that his feet will become swollen? Isn't he the one that loves to recite Quran all night? Yet he leaves these two groups and goes to the discussion circle. Why? Because in a social setting like Masjid Nabawi, it's not primarily created for you to separate yourself from the group. Of course, pray your salah, recite your Quran. But once we're all together, imagine if I was sitting here and I was on my phone the whole time, and you'd say, I'm pretty rude. We're in a cultural setting. Engage, talk, discuss, debate. That's what the Prophet would do. Now, that shows you that there were times when the Prophet would speak in a monologue, times when Imam Ali alayhi salam would speak in a dialogue, and times when they would sit in a discussion circle. And all of those had time and place. Now, what we tend to have is primarily monologue in our communities. Now, I know we do have youth discussions, but shouldn't be just for the youth. The whole community should engage in dialogue. The whole community should learn from one another, learn from one another's experience. So, the pulpit, in the way in which we have it today, is a cultural expression of our religion. Now, let's take this a little step further and really start thinking for ourselves, inshallah. I'm sure there are many people who are in the community, educationalists, teachers, theorists of education, and especially those people who are in the madrasa. I would really recommend that madrasa teachers at least try to read small books on education theory. And what you tend to see is that education theory tends to divide the ways of learning into several categories of learning. There is auditory learning, there is visual learning, and then there's things like kinesthetic learning where you engage by touch. Yeah? Now think about our majlis. 45 minutes, you sit on the floor, the speaker is talking monologue primarily, and everybody's just sitting listening. That's auditory learning. That is the worst way of learning.
Yeah.
Because our concentration as human beings is around 20 minutes, and it's only one way that the brain picks up information, which means we're ignoring the visual aid, and we're ignoring the kinesthetic, and we're ignoring the dialogue, which is called learning through action or learning through participation. 4 ways of learning. The pulpit tends to only allow for one. Now, as Muslims and as Shia, particularly of grand individuals like Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, surely the Shia should be maximizing their learning potential. It would be reprehensible for the Shia of Al Muhammad salamullahi alayhi majma'een to have a culture of learning which only makes use of 1/4 of the potential learning skill. Can you imagine sitting with any of the A'imma alayhim wassalam, Mahdi salamullahi alayhi returns and he says, I want to sit in your majlis and I want to experience how you guys are benefiting from the Quran, benefiting from the Prophet. What would he say? I think he would be quite disappointed in us. Especially having a tradition of Baqir al-Ulum, the one who splits open knowledge. Ja'far al-Sadiq, the teacher of all of the Imams of the Muslims. And yet, we constrict ourselves. And this is what we stated. The moment the culture constricts you, constricts your growth, limits your growth, you have to question whether it's working, whether we should practice it. Now, as we stated, we've got 4 ways of learning. Now let's go into something a little bit further, and then we'll move on to the next question. I want you guys to really think with me for a second, and my audience, inshallah, and really be open-hearted to this point. Imagine you are 15 years old, or a youth, you're coming to the majlis. Most 15-year-olds don't want to come to the majlis. At least I didn't want to come to the majlis in my time. If my dad is listening, then I apologize for you hearing this. I know, I'm going to get a chappa when I get home.
I always did.
Oh, no, yeah, I loved it. It was great. Ahsan. No, so, look.
Hi, Mom.
So imagine now, you're the 15-year-old and you're coming to the majlis, and everybody loves the majlis. Yeah, one guy just logged off. That means...
I think that's good. That's logged off.
Whoops.
Please come back.
No, so as a youth, you tend, you're not always wanting to attend. Now think about the practical challenges. When we're at home and you're watching something, you're sitting on a couch, it's really comfortable. You've got a drink with you, you've got popcorn, you've got some snacks with you, it's all good. You're watching TV and the film is action, there's explosions, there's jokes, there's comedy, it's got you engaged. There's a soundtrack, it's moving you emotionally, all of these things. And then we tell the kid, come to the majlis, sit on the floor for 45 minutes, and stare upwards at the funny man with the long beard and the turban, him talk about Prophet Nuh alayhi salam for 45 minutes. And of course, I'm not disrespecting Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. My point is, think about what their experience is in the real world at home versus what you're asking them to come to. Then go to the school or the university, and they're playing and they're engaged and they're practically engaged and they've got homework to do, which means they've got to prove their learning and they've got to write, and then they're being tested on it. And the educationist teacher has to make it fun. Or at university, there's the screen and the professor understands how to educate. And then you come to the mosque. So there is a gap between education theory, how to get the best out of learning, and the way we tend to do things in our Masjid al-Husayniyat. Why? Because we're very stuck within a culture.
Yeah.
And the moment you try to tell someone, this isn't the best form of learning, yes, but you can't disrespect the pulpit of Rasulullah. I'll tell you a story. I was the resident in Haydari for 2.5 years or whatever, and there was a majlis for the wilada of Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. Now on Thursday nights, we had shifted the culture, and we were I would sit on the floor on Thursday nights, and we would have like a discussion circle, and I would do a tafsir of Nahj al-Balagha. Ladies on one side, partition, gents on the other side, and we all sit around in a kind of a circle, very intimate discussion like we're having now. The next night, on Friday night, was the wilada of Imam Jawad alayhi salam. I walked in, majlis time, there were 3 people there for the majlis. I said to the Mukki Saab, I feel embarrassed to do a program for Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam on the pulpit when it's such a huge hall and there are only 3 people sitting down. Would you allow me to make a point, and I want to sit on the floor, and if we have 10 people, like the ladies and the gents, we can have a more intimate discussion like we do on Thursday nights. So we did it, 45-minute majlis as normal. And of course, as the majlis went, we had more and more people, and it ended up being a nice turnout, alhamdulillah. After we finished, the president ran up to me and he said, "What did you do?" What do you mean? I know what he meant. Provoking the discussion. What did you do? You were sitting on the floor the whole time. It's wilada. Now, the president is a proper progressive. Like, but he's getting flack in the ear from the community. Jafar sitting on the floor, this is wilada. And I said, it was my point to the community. If you don't bother with Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, then this is what's going to happen. Who should be more worried? Me that sat on the floor to honor Imam al-Jawad. I was here on time. You lot in the community who couldn't be bothered to turn up on time for Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. Now what does the president say to that? You can't. But I'm trying to make a point. Now, one of the community members, may Allah bless him, comes up to me afterwards and he said, "Why did you sit?" And I explained, and he said, I get all that, but I felt like I didn't learn as much because you were sitting on the floor. Huh? Listen to those words. He said, I didn't learn as much because you were sitting on the floor. And I said, but my words were the same. My content was the same. My delivery was the same. There was no difference between what I would have said on the pulpit and what I would have said on the floor. He said, yeah, I know, but if you sit on the pulpit, it just feels like a majlis. This felt like a discussion circle. And I thought to myself, subhanallah, you learnt less from the statements and the life of Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam because I was sitting 2 feet lower than where I may have been sitting. Is the problem with me or is the problem with you? Now this is the negative side of culture. And when we talk about the pulpit, we do have to think about maximizing our learning potential. And we can't do that too quickly in order to alienate part of the community or make them feel like we're rushing. But if you're taking time out once a week to come to the pulpit, come to the majlis, Baba, maximize it. Most people, they don't read. Most people, their primary form of Islamic education is the pulpit. Jummah khutbah, pulpit. So if you're going to spend 45 minutes a week, an hour and a half a week learning your Islam, why not maximize it? And it's going to take an honest and healthy discussion from the community to talk about these sorts of issues, inshallah.
Forgive my ignorance, but so what was the actual purpose of having a pulpit, and how did it come about? I mean, for me personally,
the pulpit raises you physically, so you can be seen by a wider number of people, a mass crowd.
and is that how the Prophet used to do it, or did he used to do it like a discussion circle, like how?
No, the Prophet did have a particular pulpit, and the hadith is very specific. In fact, narrated by the great companion Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, there's entire chapters on Jabir's narrations about the pulpit of Rasulullah. And it says that Rasulullah had a tree stump. So they cut down a tree, and on that stump, he would either sit or he would stand, and then the rest of the community was sitting on the floor, and they were able to see Rasulullah. And of course, the bigger the crowd, the bigger the stump where he would have to stand on. The hadith says that when someone physically made a pulpit for him, actually a carpenter came and made a pulpit for Rasulullah, and Rasulullah wanted to shift, the hadith says that the tree would cry out, would moan. There could be a sound of moaning heard that the Prophet was going to leave the tree, because the tree wanted to be close to the Prophet, wanted to assist the Prophet. So it was just primarily a way to be able to convey your message to a larger audience. However, there is a sanctity to the pulpit as well. So you remember the famous hadith of the fourth Imam, Zainul Abidin, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, as he's in Masjid, or as he's, in the court of Yazid, al-La'in, when he's sitting on the pulpit and he's giving his khutbah, he himself would state, when nonsense comes from the pulpit, when these monkeys of Banu Umayyah are sitting on the pulpit, this is nothing more than just stick and wood. When an imam sits on it, it's nur, blessed, it's guidance. So the pulpit essentially is just a means to distribute information, but it is sanctified by virtue of kalam of thaqalain.
So, I mean, only if an Aimah of the Prophet is preaching from that pulpit, it'll have that grander stature?
No. Anyone who comes and preaches haqq from it, it is elevated in its sanctity.
I don't mean to undermine the position of the pulpit, but what you're saying in essence makes it sound to me similar as if, if you go to certain plays or, I don't know, performances, if it's a small enough crowd, they don't really need to put it on a stage. But when it's a big enough crowd, back then they used to use a stage. That's why the Prophet would use the pulpits. Is that, in essence, what you're saying, really?
In context, the screen that we have our PowerPoint presentation on the video is also a pulpit.
Yeah.
The pulpit is a platform in order to have the message delivered out wide. And of course, depending on the size of the crowd, the pulpit would grow or shrink. So the moment haqq is coming from that screen on the PowerPoint presentation, that is also sanctified. But if someone comes and speaks nonsense, then there's no sanctity to it. It's just plastic. But really, it is inherently valuable when goodness is coming from it. And that's why we sanctify. That's why people say, Mimbar al-Rasul. Indeed, Mimbar al-Rasul. We have to respect the Mimbar of the Prophet, because it is representative of what the Prophet's speech was.
Definitely. Just very briefly, I remember as we were talking about speaking from the pulpit, and recently myself and Joseph, we attended a 7-hour seminar about one topic, and literally that would be like a 7-hour majalis, but because it was interactive all the way through from start to finish, we didn't feel that we were sat there for so many hours, and we took away a lot from it. And I think as our communities are evolving, we should start moving towards more interactive, like even if it's a majalis, but when you can interact with the Maulana and you can ask him questions there and then, and you can provoke, get your
Yeah,
thoughts moving.
I mean, when we have majalises, can it not be a dialogue instead of a monologue? Does it have to be that way that we have to just listen and not speak back?
But wouldn't that be upon the community to do that? Because think about it, the lecturer, if he wants to do it, he can do it. But the lecturers need to be willing to do it.
What I'm saying is that allowed?
Of course it's allowed.
It's never happened.
As
so
I
it
mentioned,
sounds
in
like-
Nahj al-Balagha, Imam Ali alayhi salam would have people standing up in the middle of his sermon asking him questions. So of course it's allowed. But there's an ihtiram that the community wants to keep to. Now, I would argue when it comes to the so-called big nights, makhsus nights, the current culture might still be benefiting the community. In the 10 days of Muharram, for example, keep the monologue. Keep that kind of, the speaker is speaking, and maybe afterwards there's a Q&A session, because that's probably the way in which the community is getting the best out of the speaker, and the speaker is getting the best out of the community. But I think outside of that, there is great scope to be able to query the way in which the pulpit is engaged with its audience. And I think that there's no harm in trying out new practices for the sake of seeing which ones objectively create more learning. Now, here what we've been doing these last several nights together is that the speaker will come and print off, or he will provide the ayat that we've been going through, correct? And the idea was that it's visual, it's kinesthetic, we're learning together. God willing, you take it home and you won't just recycle it, it's there. If ever you want to see those verses for yourself, it's available to you, and so on and so forth. Now, it might be that in the future, on Thursday nights, we take a series. And what we do is we have a small book, or a chapter from a book. And each and every one of us brings that book, or the Jamaat provides the book, or prints the pages from the book, or we buy the book, or whatever. And all of us, we come, and for a period of 8 weeks, 12 weeks, every Thursday night, we are going through this one book, we're going through this one chapter. So what happens is, we have the forms of learning that help, but also, we as a community are elevated together. You see, most of us aren't readers. And when we are readers, we're all reading different books. But imagine now we get a small book on akhlaq, small book on tafsir. And what we do is we systematically go through that chapter or through that book together.
Like a book club.
Like a Thursday night book club. Now, I think that would be a far more productive majlis than the simple 40-minute monologue and then 5 minutes gham at the end.
Inshallah. Right, we're going to pass the mic over to Brother Tawsif now to do a quick nasheed for us, inshallah. So, quick nasheed, bismillah. And after Tawsif's done with his nasheed, inshallah, we'll announce the winner for the competition. So keep those answers coming in. Just a reminder of the question, if you can... What's the question again, please?
Oh yes, reminder of the question that we asked for the first one was, how many sons and daughters did Prophet Muhammad have? And at the moment we've only had one entrant who, she may be a winner. It's an 11-year-old who sent the reply through. So you've got till the end of Tawsif's Nasheed to get your answers in. The question once again is, how many sons and daughters did the Prophet Muhammad have? Whenever you're ready,
Salawat.
Allahu Akbar, 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 Allah. If you ask me about love and what I know about it, my answer will be, it's everything about Allah, the pure love to our souls. He's the creator of you and me, the heavens and the whole universe, the one that made us whole and free, the guardian of his true believers. So when the time gets hard and there's no way to turn, As he promised, he will always be there to bless us with his love and his mercy, 'cause as he promised, he will always be there. He's always watching us, guiding us, and he knows what's deep in our hearts. So when you lose your way to Allah, you should turn, 'cause as he promised, he will always be there. He brings us out from the darkness into the light. Subhanallah, capable of everything. We should never feel afraid of anything, as long as we follow his guidance all the way through our short time we have in this life. Soon it will all be over and we'll be in his heaven and we'll all be fine. So when the time gets hard and there's no way to turn, as he promised, he will always be there. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everyone.
Mr. Maher.
I hope you enjoyed that, everybody. A beautiful voice of Brother Tawsif. Okay, so we did have one entrant for our competition for the fidget spinner. She's won. Yeah.
Jafar, didn't you enter?
Did she get the question right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You said she's won, but
No, I should have read out the answer first.
yeah. What's the answer?
Yeah. Right. Well, basically, her answer is from Fatima Rizvi, who is 11 years old.
Ahsant.
Her answer was Prophet Muhammad had two sons, Abdullah and Qasim, who both passed away, and one daughter, Bibi Fatima, and that is the correct answer. So,
MashaAllah.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ahsant. Well done.
well done for that. That was. We will have the prize for you in the mosque tomorrow. I guess your father can pick it up from one of the Behlool Society members, or we can have it in the AV room, I guess, and you can collect it from there. And moving on to our final topic for tonight, because we are rushed for time. The other thing which we were speaking about is, with regards to culture, is how we are doing azadari and promoting Islam now, being in the West, especially when Islam has got such a negative image around the UK and, well, most of the West now.
Around the Western world, yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, like, as our community is developed, not just ours, I mean, just the Shia community in general, I mean, we noticed that all around the world there are, like, julusis released. Well, people are coming out with julusis, you know, and keeping in mind the negative image we have now, I mean, what's the most positive way that we can promote Islam by going out onto the streets, but without giving, you know, like a negative image, especially with what we're shown in the media about Muslims already. So, I mean, what's the best way to go about doing promotion of Islam in the streets without ruining our image any further?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is a really important question because every community has its different way that it wishes to express itself. So, the first thing, as we mentioned, we always have to go back to the basic question of asking, what is it that A, Islam wants to achieve, and B, what is it that this particular action is trying to achieve? So Islam, of course, is trying to achieve, as we keep mentioning, growth of the human being. It's trying to help a human being achieve the fullness of their capacity. It's trying to help the individual and the collective and reach a state of human completion. Then we ask, what is the julus trying to achieve?
Yeah.
So let me ask that to you guys. What do you think the julus is trying to achieve?
I think it's a form of da'wah.
It's a form of da'wah, meaning?
To spread the message of Imam Husayn alayhi salam.
Excellent.
And what happened at Karbala, what was done to the grandson of the Prophet by the Muslims, in essence.
With that in mind, I mean, is our interpretation of how we're doing da'wah giving it in a positive light to those that don't know anything about Imam Husayn or about Karbala?
I think the old school generations pretty much are used to doing things the way they were done back home, really. So, you know, you take a julus out, there's someone at the head reciting a noha, and people are doing matam following. Different communities, different cultures might react to that differently. I know that in a Western society, it might not even raise questions, to be honest. I don't know. People, do they wonder what's going on when they see somebody doing matam, or do they just think, well, what's this barbarian doing on the middle of the road? Why isn't he, and it's most of the time, the older generation, obviously, they don't communicate in English, it's Urdu or Punjabi or Seraiki or whatever, and
well, what we have the practice and its goals, and we want to ask whether the goal of Islam, which we mentioned, is being met by the expression of the culture, i.e. the julus and the way in which we're trying to do the julus. So when I asked you, what's the julus, the purpose of it, you said da'wah, right? Okay. So other people will say it's da'wah, yes, but for example, they might add and they will say it's a protest against Yazid and every type of Yazid. For others, it's a way to express themselves. For others, it's a form of defense, to say we're ready to go on the streets and no matter what happens to us, we're ready to take it in the way of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. So there's all these different types of thinking, firstly, as to what the julus is actually for and what it's trying to achieve. Then another question comes, and we ask, is the julus primarily for us as the internal community to participate in, or do we want to universalize it whereby others feel like they can participate in it? Now what I mean by that is that if it's a culture of Islam, then people will look at it and say, wow, that's what Islam is. I'm observing and I want to see from the outside what these Muslims, what these Pakistani Muslims, what these Indian Muslims, what these Khoja Muslims are doing in the name of Islam. On the other side, you could say, well, it's not about Muslims, it's about universalizing, and we want to get everybody participating in this. Which one is the julus? And I'm not asking you to say which one you would like. I'm asking, as a community, not necessarily here, but generally, as a community, is the julus for us to express ourselves, or are we trying to get everybody to participate in that expression? Which one?
I think it should be universalized where everyone can partake, and because that will probably raise more questions than rather than just being just for us. It will raise more questions from people that don't know anything if you keep it open for all communities rather than just for your own community.
Yeah, I think if your idea is to do it for yourself, then it's quite selfish, because the whole point of a julus and going out and doing it is so that you can show others why we're mourning. And I think the way you should do it is, it depends on the country you're at. So I guess if you're in Pakistan and the audience that you're around, or the people that are there, you do it in a way that they would understand. If you're here in the West, you do it the way the West would understand.
What you have is many a time, I have asked this question and people will say, well, the julus is for us. We want to be able to express ourselves. So we don't want others necessarily, we want them to observe what we're doing so they see what Muslims are like. And then you get other people that say, no, we need to universalize this. So these are basic questions that I've asked in order for you to start thinking about, how you lay a foundation towards the julus. Now, I'll tell you a story. I was in, which city was it? I think it was Minneapolis in the United States. And we went for a Who is Husayn campaign. And what we were doing is we were distributing bottles of water, and on it obviously just said, Who is Husayn? With the red logo, wrapper around it. And we would just stand in the middle of downtown, one of the busiest streets, and we just hand out bottles of water. There must be like 50 of us, so we're just handing out bottle after bottle. I'll tell you an experience I had. One guy comes up to us, he takes this bottle, and he says, you're giving out water in the name of Saddam Hussein? How dare you? And he throws the water in the bin in front of us. Now, why did he do that? Because he has no other context to the word Hussein other than Saddam Hussein al-La'in. That shows, if you understand this story, the wider world, and especially the West, has very little to no context as to who Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam was. And so when we go out and represent Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, we have to be conscious that sometimes people are seeing Hussein for the first time through the way in which we are presenting Husayn to them. So, I've seen juluses where horses are walking up and down the street. I've seen juluses where people have these massive black flags with Arabic writing on it. What does that look like to the non-Muslims? ISIS. I've seen Muslims in this country, in Northampton, out on the street, bare-chested, beating themselves for 4 hours. What do you think the non-Muslim who has no experience of Husayn alayhi salam will think of Husayn? Are they attracted towards Husayn, or are they put off and repulsed or intimidated? Or are they curious? Now what you tend to have is, no, these people should start thinking, they should start asking. I've seen juluses where they have these pictures of this six-month-old baby with an arrow in his neck, blood everywhere. They don't know whether we want to do that or whether we're protesting that. But they actually don't. I swear, there have been times where people, there was one mosque, they were beating themselves, and policewoman actually threw up. She was there to guard. She was there participating in helping protect the julus. And she's thrown up. She's that repulsed by it. So I'm giving these stories because I want people to understand that we have a real world impact, and people associate our religion with what we do. And they don't know that this is our culture. They think that's actually what Muslims believe in. Now, that's nothing to do with Islam. It's nothing to do with Islam. It's our cultural expression of Islam. I can't make that any more clearer. The julus is not Islamic. It's a cultural expression of an Islamic event. We want to commemorate something, and we are commemorating in this way, in this street, at this time, in this manner. That means we are completely owning the way in which we are doing that practice. Which means we're responsible for it. Now, if it's entirely for our own benefit, then all that matters is how we do it and not how other people see it. If we want other people to be taken in by it, then we are concerned with how they interpret that message. Thirdly, if we say it's not just about our expression, it's about universalizing it, then the julus can take on all sorts of different forms. I'll recommend two things. One, if you want to make an entire city march with you, make it where all of them have a vested interest in the same demonstration. For example, we want to demonstrate against terrorism. Not just terrorism performed in the name of Islam and by Muslims, terrorism of all kinds. Terrorism performed by Hindu nationals. Terrorism performed by Western hegemony. Terrorism performed by Al Saud. And we are protesting it all. And so we are having a protest on, I don't know when you do your julus, I'm just giving an example, on the afternoon of the 10th of Muharram, and you're going to protest and you're going to walk from here to there, and we invite all people. We're going to send leaflets 3 weeks in advance, 1 week in advance. We're going to invite the churches, the synagogues, all the other mosques, and we're going to get a thing, we're going to bring it together, and because we have organized it, when we reach points, we're going to talk to you about what we'd like to talk to you about. And we'd like to mention amongst the stories is a man by the name of Husayn ibn Ali, a lady by the name of Zainab bint Ali, so on and so forth. This is one way you can universalize it. You can universalize it in the same way by talking about what Imam Husayn alayhi salam would want you to march against today. What would Imam Husayn alayhi salam want to demonstrate against today? I would argue things like the destruction of our planet through environmental damage, like global warming. You want to do matam? Great, but your mosque will be under 30 feet of water in 20 years' time because you're destroying the planet. Where are you going to do your matam? Where are you going to do your majlis? Where are you going to do your da'a kumail? Imam Husayn alayhi salam would want us to protest against nuclear weapons. Imam Husayn alayhi salam would want us to protest against poverty, against corporate greed. Protest against these things and bring Imam Husayn alayhi salam into it, because this is what he would represent. So this is how you can make it universal. Second and last recommendation I would have. When you have people who are going to stand and watch you, inshallah they're not put off by the type of expression that we're giving to them, what you do is you hand out a leaflet and you say, it might be a CD, or it might be a leaflet, and you say to them, we'd like to give this to you for free, and we'd like you in your own time to watch it or to read it if you don't mind. The leaflet might say something like, in 3 hours' time, we're going to have a full free dinner, and we're having an interfaith dialogue with this rabbi, this priest, this imam, inside the mosque at this time, and we'd like you to all attend. So when they come, it's not just, well, they're just seen for 5 minutes, a bunch of Muslims walking past and shouting things and calling things and telling them about a man that died 1400 years ago that they have no connection with. You're practically doing da'wah to bring them into the mosque. Or it might be that you're doing it in 2 weeks' time when you have your Husayn day. You have to think about how you're measuring the success of these things. If you're just walking from point A to point B, there's no way for you to know whether you've got your message across to people. I asked you, what's the purpose of your julus? You said, da'wah. Okay, well, measure the success of your da'wah. How many people from the street came into the masjid and actually decided to pick up the Quran and go, wow, there's no terrorism in here. Pick up Sahih Sajjadi and go, wow, this is even greater than the Psalms of David. Now, if it's just, I'm going to show some flags and recite some latam, I have to ask, to what extent is it actually bringing about a difference in the society? So universalization is one potential, and the second, to have measurement of it, is to try to bring people in. Not only one person may come, 100 people may come, but bring them into the masjid. Don't let them fear Muslims. Let them know what happens inside a mosque. Let them know what we talk about, what our books say on our shelves. 99.99% of people will never have been to a mosque, never open up an Islamic book. We're the ones at fault for that. And right now, there is a real rich time to get people in to talk about Islam. They want to talk about it. They're desperate to talk about it. Some of them don't know a thing. Some of them think that they know a lot. Some of them want to hate us. Some of them want to love us. Some want to protect us. Some want to throw stones at us. Brilliant. But they're all engaged. How can the julus maximize that inquisitive nature about Muslims and Shias in this time?
Thank you very much for that very interesting point. I'm hoping that everyone could take something on board from tonight's discussion. Unfortunately, we have come to an end of our show tonight. And first of all, just like to thank Sheikh Jafar Ladik for joining us for these 2 episodes.
Thank you very much.
And inshallah, he would be happy to join us again sometime.
I would love to. I'd be honored. Thank you very much. I look forward to it, inshallah.
Excellent. And unfortunately, we did get a few text messages a bit too late, so we can't go through that now. But inshallah, if we are back online again, we will go through that on another time.
Thank you for tuning in, and inshallah we'll be back.